Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. And happy Thanksgiving to those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving. Okay, today in the Dungeon Dive, we are going to take a look at the Doomed apocalyptic horror hunting. This is a new little kind of narrative skirmish game from Chris McDowell. So, viewers of the Dungeon Dive may recognize Chris McDowell as the author, creator of one of the first kind of really popular rules light indie RPGs called Into the Odd. And this was an earlier version of Into the Odd here. And it recently experienced one of, if not the greatest glow up in RPG history in this new version from Free League Publishing. Free League, they just continue to knock things completely out of the park, right? But this new version of Into the Odd is absolutely gorgeous. We haven't taken a detailed look at this yet on the channel, but we will at some time. But Chris McDowell was very influential with Into the Odd into the realm of indie RPGs and rules light RPGs. And I think that the Doomed is kind of going to do that same thing for tabletop skirmish games. And I think that the Doomed is a really good game for people who are coming from board games, who are curious about narrative skirmish games and who might want to try them out. I think the Doomed is a really good place to start. It's weird. It's completely rules light. It couldn't be any simpler as far as the mechanisms go. It has a really cool theme. It has a fantastic scenario generation system. That's one of the coolest things about it. It can be played on a small table. I am experimenting with playing on a really small map here. This map here, this is one book. This is one of the Loke Battlemat's cyberpunk books. And the game does recommend a 2x2 play space, but this is about 2 by 1 foot and 4 inches or so. And so I'm trying to play the game on this really small space to see how that works. And I think it will work. If not, you can always lay 2 of the Loke Battlemat books side by side for a 2x2. But yeah, so we're just going to do a quick flip through, talk a little bit about the game. I'll give you some of my preliminary thoughts because I've only experimented with the game. I haven't played a full game. I haven't played a full campaign, but I'm planning on doing that in 2024 and coming back and looking at the game in more detail. But let's read a little bit about Doomed apocalyptic horror hunting. Hunger, hatred, domination, oblivion, and ruin. The world is dying, poised on the brink of falling to one of these great dooms. Factions pursue their own interests as likely to be the heralds of the world's destruction as they are its survivors. The Doomed is a quick-playing, rules-light skirmish wargame in which small warbands compete to hunt unique horrors in a bleak sci-fi world. Scenarios are defined by the horror and the conflict in which the hunt takes place. Each horror has its own strengths, weaknesses, and tactics, often breaking the rules in unique ways, and must be approached carefully. Stealth, cunning, and brute force will all have a role to play. So thematically, think of this as something like Monster Hunter in a really kind of dark and twisted apocalyptic Gamma World style setting. Because of its mishmash of settings, it's kind of medieval, it's kind of futuristic, it's kind of apocalyptic, it's like Gamma World meets Warhammer. And because of that, you really can use a variety of things to play the Doomed apocalyptic horror hunting. This is a miniatures agnostic game, meaning you can use any minis you want. I just happen to have some minis set up that I was experimenting with from Star Saga. So I have my warband. I'm going to be using the good guys from Star Saga as my warband, and then a bunch of the creatures from Star Saga will be my enemies, the things that I'm trying to hunt and kill. Now, one of the words you're going to hear a lot in relation to the Doomed is kit bashing. And for those of you who are more into board games and maybe don't know what kit bashing is, Kit bashing is just a process of taking a whole bunch of different minis and pieces, cutting them up and reassembling them. Forbidden Psalm used some kit bashing, but this game really does focus on the kit bashing, and it's one of the main topics that you'll see discussed a lot in other YouTube videos. If you have a bunch of sprues that you have of parts and pieces that you haven't used from putting together other models, or you have a bunch of old models that you can snip up and glue back together to create weird looking mishmash creations, you can do that, but you don't have to do that. You can play this with any minis that you have. You don't have to kit bash. You can use standees, you can use tokens, you can use little pieces of paper. You don't need a whole bunch of stuff to play games like this. And once again, I think that focus on the modeling side of the skirmish game hobby does a really, really big disservice to the skirmish game hobby. I think those two things should be separated, and that's kind of how I'm going to be approaching more of these kinds of games in the future, to encourage people to give them a try, even if they aren't into the 3D terrain and they don't have terrain. All they have is some battle mats and just using a whole bunch of minis that you already have. It's really easy to do. So don't think that you need to kit bash. Don't think that you need a whole bunch of stuff to play the Doomed, because you really don't. And one of the best things is that it can be played on a small table. So the rules, while the rules look a little intimidating at 173 pages, most of that 173 pages is all on creating random scenarios. This game has an incredible way to create random scenarios. And just with this one book, you can be playing this game for a really, really long time. I'd like this brief introduction here. What is this game? It's a narrative skirmish game, up to 8 doomed individuals. I am going to be playing at max 4 people in my warband. On each side, taking on a horror while competing over conflicting objectives. So this game can be played 1 versus 1 with kind of a third party, the enemies in the center, fighting both players, or you can play it cooperatively and as a solo game. And it seems to me to work on all 3 levels. Simple rules with no measuring. That's right. You do not need to measure anything in this game. You won't need a tape measure. You won't need a little jig for anything. The movement is super simple. You say where you want to move and you roll a d6 to see if you can move there. If you're not, then you stop somewhere in the middle. If you're playing competitively, then your competitor will put you somewhere along that path, showing that you failed to make your objective. Fast battles that can be finished easily under an hour and played back to back. That seems true. Open enough to use with a variety of miniatures and scenery. Yes. Rules that create drama. Play to win, but play to find out what happens. So that's really important. And I think that's where the lineage from Into the Odd and other really rules light kind of indie RPGs, where that lineage fits in is just with how simple this game is and how the focus is on the story. The focus is on the story of the action, of the cool stuff that happens on the table. No stacking, no tracking. Focus on the miniatures on the battlefield, not lists, tokens, or off-board resources. So the members of your warband, they have 1 stat. No hit points. You don't have to keep track of anything except for 1 stat and the gear that they are armed with, which will use that 1 stat to operate. And it's designed for small tabletops with dense scenery. That's one thing that you do want in this game, is you want a lot of things that are blocking line of sight and blocking movement, because you never need to measure to move anywhere. So you want pieces of terrain that you can move your miniature to as points of interest to move to. So you don't want kind of a Warhammer battlefield with a lot of empty space. You want a lot of terrain, a lot of things to block line of sight, and a lot of things to block movement. So the main crux of the game, the main stat, is each of your models will have 1 stat, and that's called quality. And there are different levels of quality. A leader has a quality of 3+, an agent has a quality of 4+, and an initiate has a quality of 5+. What that means is if this was my leader and he was a 3+ leader, everything that I wanted this mini to do would need to be done on a 3/6 roll of 3 or higher. And that's it. That's basically the rules of the game right there. If my mini was standing here, and for a movement in general, you can move about 6 inches. So, you can move a hand span away. That's kind of fair movement. If you're playing on a smaller board, maybe think of a movement as a finger away or 4 inches or something like that. But let's say I wanted my hero to move, this leader to move from here to here. Okay. He has a quality of 3+. I would need to roll a 3 or higher in order for him to do that. That's it. If he was armed with a gun and I wanted to shoot that gun, I have a quality of 3+. I roll on a 3 or higher. I shoot at my target. That is basically the rules. And then there are a whole bunch of things that kind of break those rules. There are different ways to run. Your first movement action, you get to complete without even rolling your quality. It's only additional movement actions or special movement actions that will trigger your movement quality. As far as or your test of an ability, when you want to jump a gap, you roll your quality and so on. Modifiers are always limited to either +1 or -1. And that pertains to the quality. That modifies the quality, not the dice roll. So that modifies your target number. The same as shooting. When you shoot something, you roll your quality. If you hit it, you do damage. Damage is really cool in this game. I love it because you don't have to keep track of hit points. You're either damaged or you're not. And when something is damaged, they have to roll on a shock table. So let's say this monster here had spit some acid at my leader and he did 3 points of damage. Okay, so my leader has a quality of 3. So for each point of damage, I'm going to roll my quality. So I need to get a 3 up on for each point of damage in order to prevent the damage. I prevented none of that damage. Terrible roll. However, regardless of how many hits go through, you roll on the shock table once. So if you're damaged, you're damaged. And then you roll on the shock table. You roll 2d6 and you look up the result. Opportunity. The attacker gets a free move or attack. If you rolled a 10, last gasp, perform a free action. So because I got damaged, I was able to perform a free action. If you roll snake eyes, you're slaughtered. The unit is taken out in a messy way. If you roll a 12, vengeance, one ally gets a free attack against your attacker. So taking damage in this game isn't just a negative thing that stops your momentum in the game. It's a thing that goes to making the game interesting in a narrative way. I love this. This right here is one of the things that I think really elevates this game to such a high narrative standard. I love how simple the rules are. I've watched a couple of reviews of this game from longtime war gamers who are into more crunch, and they have some issues with this game because it's so simple, because there isn't crunch. This is the least crunchy war game I've ever seen. And there might be other war games that are even simpler, but it's hard to imagine that. But that's basically the rules. If you get that down, everything else in this book is kind of augmenting those rules in simple and interesting ways. Your weapons have a number of different qualities, not qualities, but a number of different aspects. They will be defined by their range. They're either melee or they are ranged. They will be defined by the number of attack dice. So you might have a weapon that says R1 times 2. So that means that it is a range and you roll 1 die and then it does 2 points of damage. So that's it. You might have a melee 1 times 1. That's a melee attack. So you have to be in base contact with whatever you are attacking. You roll 1 die. A hit does 1 damage and so on. And then that whoever you are attacking will roll against its quality on the number of damage dice that it takes. Very, very simple. But then we get into our factions, and this is where some of the nuance starts to play with those rules. So you have a certain number of points. So you have a certain number of renown points that you can spend on your faction, on your warband. And there are different factions. And the different factions will have different types of people, different types of warriors that you can buy. And they will depend on points. Leaders, you always have a leader. You get a leader for free. And then you can spend your renown points on your other members. And you can buy followers, and those range anywhere from 4 to 2 points. And of course, the higher the point value are, the better their quality. And you don't want a bunch of people in your warband with a quality of 5+, because having to hit that 5+ every time, that can be very, very difficult. But those only cost 2 points, whereas a Paragon, a quality level of 4, is 4 points. And then each one of those units will come with some innate gear and usually one kind of simple skill. And the skills, a lot of the skills are pretty easy to understand in this game. They will either allow you to re-roll your attack dice, re-roll your movement dice, re-roll your damage dice, and so on, or your defense dice. And then each one of the factions also has its own gear chart, and the gear costs points as well. And in between skirmishes, in between missions, you can buy new gear and arm your warband with that gear. So in order to keep track of your warband, all you need is basically a name, their quality level, and what their gear is. And that's all you need to keep track of on a miniature by miniature basis. We also have these rewards and these leader ambitions. And these are kind of like achievements that you are trying to gain as you are playing, and these can unlock cool things to add to your warband as you achieve them. But we have different factions. We have the Inheritor Courts. So I mean, just look at these guys. Basically, Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40K guys. So if you have any of those minis, you could use those to create your Inheritor Courts. Same as the Martyr Retinues there. But all kinds of weird, creepy things, robots and mutants and armored knights and creatures. But we have that faction there, the Martyr Retinues. We have the Reborn Coven, the Warped, the Exile Bands, the Wild. And then here we have some sample warbands. So this is an entire warband. That's all you will need to write down. So you can easily keep an entire warband on like a half sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. It's really, really cool. The progress system is interesting because you're just dealing with getting new fun things to use. And then at the end of a skirmish, you might have some casualties. You might have people that were taken out. And if you do, you roll up on the casualty table to see if they are able to come back or not. And then you might have to spend points in order to hire a replacement member for your warband. Another thing that you're going to keep track of during the campaign are those 5 dooms. Those dooms that we read at the back of the book at the beginning of this video. We have hunger, hatred, domination, oblivion, and ruin. And depending on which one of those dooms you roll up, you will have to deal with a random event that triggers at the beginning of that scenario that corresponds to that doom. So let's say that we were playing with this domination events table. We have all of these various dooms from Pretender. A new power is rising, gathering influential supporters. For this battle, only you cannot recruit new members that have a quality of 4 or higher. Or perhaps it is a barrage. Any potential rivals will be blasted away. In the next battle, at the end of round 1, any unit that can be seen from above, not hidden in a building, takes 1 damage. So barrage, the things are raining down from the sky. So there are 5 different random event charts that you will use, you will roll up to find out how those dooms are influencing your scenario that you are playing at that time. And then we get into the whole rest of the book is randomly generated scenarios. And this is amazing. I absolutely love this. So a scenario will be a combination of 2 things. The horror, this is the monster you are fighting, and a conflict, something that is adding a little bit of spice, something that is augmenting that fight against the horror. Think of this like the Monster Hunter video games where, this is your target. This is the monster you're trying to hunt down and kill, but then there is an electric storm, or there is another third faction that comes in and throws a monkey wrench into the situation. So super, super cool. And there is a D66 roll for each one of those. And so to generate a scenario, you roll up a random horror, and then you roll up a random conflict, and you mash those two things together, and that is your scenario. This is so cool. So let's take a look here. Let's roll up our random horror here to see what we might go up against. Red will be 10s. So 66. All right. The Techno Basilisk on page 110. And so each one of these horrors will kind of break the rules and add their own little differences to the game. So we have the Techno Basilisk. Don't look. At the start of the game, deploy the Techno Basilisk at the center of the board. Okay, what does a Techno Basilisk look like? I have no idea, but it can be anything. That's one of the cool things about this game, is that it doesn't really give you physical descriptions of anything. And so any mini you have, you just need to use your imagination to make whatever thing you want. This creature here could be 5 different creatures. If you only have a handful of minis, just reuse them. That's super cool. But each of the horrors will have their quality. So the Techno Basilisk is a 3-up. So anything that it does, it will accomplish on a roll of 3 or higher. But then it has a whole bunch of different things, such as its Shatter Beam. It's a ranged of 2 dice at 2 damage, and it does double the damage against exhausted targets. It has Claws with a melee of 2 dice, and each hit does 3 damage. It can glare, it can petrify, and then each horror will be accompanied by things that are called Nexuses. And Nexuses are kind of its power source. In one of the horrors, for example, was this Minotaur, and its Nexuses were piles of dead bodies that it was eating. In order to do damage directly to the horror, so in this case, the Techno Basilisk, you first have to destroy its Nexuses. And as Nexuses are destroyed, you go down the list. Each of the scenarios will have 3 Nexuses to destroy. And as each one is destroyed, it adds a little bit of a wrinkle to the game. And it makes the game harder for the hunters. So for instance, if you were fighting this Techno Basilisk and you destroyed one of the Nexuses, the Techno Basilisk loses its glare for the rest of the round. No other Nexus can be destroyed this round. Okay, so that actually makes the game easier because it loses its glare. It loses one of its abilities. And then if you destroyed the third one, you might lose its Petrify permanently. When you attack the horror, or when you do anything to it, they will roll on their response table, and that's kind of like their AI. And then also, like Monster Hunter, when you defeat the horror, you will look at the rewards section and you will get bits and pieces of that creature, of that thing you destroyed, and you will be able to use those things to augment your warband. Such a cool thing. And there are so many. We have the Mantivora. Okay, what the heck is a Mantivora? It feeds on more than your flesh. At the start of the game, deploy the Mantivora in the center of the board. It has a quality level of 3. It can attack with claws and jaws. It can gorge. It can feast. It has 3 Nexuses. It has its response table. Some of the horrors will also come with minions. And so I know I have these little guys as minions that might come out with the whatever the monster is. A Rage Angel, a Flesh Titan, a Rook Wyvern, a Shadow Cutter, a Sin Echo, and so all kinds of cool things. And as you destroy them, you will get to use their body parts and their weapons. You will be able to arm your own warband with those things. Super, super cool. So in addition to that Techno Basilisk, we also have our Conflict. And our Conflict, 2 66s in a row. Let's roll something different. 54. So the Conflict here is Tunnels. Okay, let's see what kind of monkey wrench this Conflict throws in. A maze of disused tunnels is branching out into one warband's territory and must be destroyed. So the Conflict will add some spice to your terrain. It might define some roles. So one warband is the aggressor, the other is the defender. And it'll also give you rules on how to play that Conflict solo, and special rewards you will get for completing the objective of that Conflict. So again, mixing and matching those together with 66 of each, you have a ton of variety to play, and it is so cool. I think this game is really fascinating. I have had a great time reading the book and just kind of experimenting on the table to see how things work. And they work really well because it's so simple. At first I thought, wait, this is really simple. Is this actually going to work as a game? And I really think it will. It has me really excited. As far as mods go, so we have skills and mods. As I said at towards the beginning, your skills basically just give you rerolls. So we have fierce, precise, nimble, and tough. So one of your models might be fierce. Let's say this guy was fierce. Fierce, reroll when fighting. Perfect. That's melee attack. Fighting is melee. Now let's say this guy was precise. Reroll when shooting. So he can reroll when doing range attacks. Nimble, reroll when moving. And tough, reroll when recovering saving versus damage. So those are your basic skills. We also have a bunch of mods, and mods might come with gear. They might come with equipment. You might be able to buy different mods, but these mods are basically a keyword, and they will give you kind of a rule-breaking ability, such as Frenzy. At the end of the unit's turn, all enemies touching it take 1 damage. So very simple. Jump. Ignore a single obstacle on the unit's first move each turn. Loyal. The unit may shoot as if it were a quality 3 if it can see the leader. Opportunist. The unit may act as if it were a quality 2 on free actions that it receives from a shock roll. Really fascinating ways to modify your warband, your units. But yeah, this is a neat game. I think if you are curious about getting into small table narrative skirmish games and you are coming more from a board game background, or maybe even more from a rules light kind of indie RPG background, I think the Doomed might be a fantastic entry into this segment of the hobby. And of course it is from Osprey Games. And yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this. I think the narrative skirmish game is kind of new to me. You know, I just kind of started getting into it with games like Forbidden Psalm and 5 Leagues from the Borderlands and games like that. But it is a segment of the hobby that I am very interested in exploring more. And as more games like this and Forbidden Psalm and 5 Leagues come out that really do kind of marry that idea of using all of the things you already have from board games, and they marry that with some elements from RPGs and from creating cool stories at the table, of being able to quickly generate random scenarios, ways to play these kinds of games solo. Yeah, these are games that I'm going to spend a lot more time exploring as time goes on, because especially something like this, I mean, this game is easier than most board games I play, and I think it will give me a lot of really cool vibes and feelings. So I did want to mention one thing. Let's say you were playing on this map here, and one of the issues with playing on 2D terrain is you don't have elevation, right? But on this map here, we have like this acid river over here, and we have all of these crates or buildings or shacks or something. And so how can you simulate elevation on a 2D map? Well, any one of these, you could say, well, we'll block line of sight. Okay, that's easy. So, you can't shoot through any one of these. And you could say that any of these that have this little plus sign on the top to show that there are spaces, that is at a different elevation. And you could just take a dry erase marker and write the elevation and just write a number. And that number represents how many inches. If it was 3D terrain, it would be above the surface level. So if the surface level is 1, you could have lower elevation by doing -1 at certain places, or maybe -2 for a deep hole. Or you could say that this is 3. So, this is 2 inches above ground for a 3. Maybe this one here is really high and that's a 4. Maybe this is just a 2, and so on. And so you can the reason you would want to keep track of different elevations is for movement, because this would be easier to climb onto, this would be more difficult to climb onto, or it would take more movement points or more actions, more time. And also, if you were to fall off of a 4, you would probably take more damage than falling off of a 2. So very easy to keep track of things like that using 3D terrain. Much easier to store a battle map than a whole bucket of, of 3D terrain. You don't have to worry about painting it. But yeah, so if you're curious about narrative skirmish games, take a look at The Doomed, and you might find a game that you really like. And I am really looking forward to diving deeper into The Doomed in 2024. All right, you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at The Doomed. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.